transpose with that, because I forgot to bring the sound up earlier. We are going to get into a little bit of adventure. Welcome to the final 4 chapters on Accessibly Live of the Island of Doctor Moreau. I am Joel K. Welcome, guys. This is the final 4 chapters. We have been working through the entire G.Wells classic, and hope you've been enjoying it as much as I have. We've been working with one of the best authors ever, and his creativity has known no bounds. And tonight we will be concluding, as I mentioned, The Island of Doctor Moreau by H.G. Wells. There we go. Thanks to my executive producer to letting me know that I had an echo going on. I forgot to hit the wrong button. It happens, guys. So I don't sound like I'm in a tunnel. But hopefully giving that eerie sound of the final 4 chapters of what's going to be happening. What will Pendrick do? How will they survive with the death of Moreau from the last chapter previous? H.G. Wells, as I said, he was one of the consummate writers, creators in the world. H.G. Wells, born Herbert George Wells in 1866. His writings were extensive both in the areas of fiction and nonfiction genre. His writings conjure early ideas of flight, the internet, atomic warfare, wireless communications. His writings were amazing, but his novels were also worldwide. But nonfiction, satire, and political commentary, history, and science were, plus much more, made his works appreciated in all venues of learning. He was a certifiable genius. One thing we did find out when we were doing research for reading this series of adventures from H.G. Wells was that despite his international acclaim for his works, H.G. Wells never received any accolades for his works and was never knighted by King Edward or his predecessors. Now, the thing about it is his very good friend Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was knighted. H.G. Wells was up for several Nobel Prize for literature, but never won, which was a very disappointing thing. But let's continue and get back into the last 4 chapters of H.G. Wells, The Island of Doctor Moreau, here on Accessibly Live, the Book Club Reading Room. Chapter 19, Montgomery's Bank Holiday. When this was accomplished and we had washed and eaten, Montgomery and I went into my little room and seriously discussed our position for the first time. It was then near midnight. He was almost sober, but greatly disturbed in his mind. He had been strangely under the influence of Moreau's personality. I do not think it had ever occurred to him that Moreau could die. This disaster was a sudden collapse of the habits that had become part of his nature in the 10 or more monotonous years he had spent on the island. He talked vaguely, answered my questions crookedly, wandered into general questions. "This silly ass of a world," he said. "What a muddle it all is. I haven't had any life. I wonder when it's going to begin. 16 years being bullied by nurses and schoolmasters at their own sweet will. 5 in London grinding hard at medicine, bad food, shabby lodgings, shabby clothes, shabby vice. A blunder. I didn't know any better. and hustled off to this beastly island. 10 years here. What's it all for, Pendrick? Are we bubbles blown away by a baby? It was hard to deal with such ravings. The thing we have to think of now is how to get away from this island. What's the good of getting away? I'm an outcast. Where am I to join on? It's all very well for you, Pendrick. Poor old Moreau, we can't leave him here and have his bones picked, as it is. And besides, what will become of the decent part of the beast folk? Well, said I, that will do tomorrow. I've been thinking we might make a brushwood into a pyre and burn his body and those other things. Then that will happen with the beast folk. I don't know. I suppose those were made the beasts of prey will make silly asses of themselves sooner or later. We can't massacre the lot, can we? I suppose that's what your humanity would suggest. But they'll change. They are sure to change. He talked thus inconclusively until at last I felt my temper going. Damnation! He exclaimed, at some petulance of mine. Can't you see I'm in a worse hole than you are? And he got up and went for a brandy. Drink? He said, returning, your logic-chopping, chalky-faced saint of an atheist. Drink. Not I, said I, and sat grimly watching his face under the yellow paraffin flame as he drank himself into gregarious misery. I have a memory of an infinite tedium. He wandered into a maudlin defense of the beast people and Mei Ling. Mei Ling, he said, was the only thing he had ever really cared for him. And suddenly an idea came to him. I'm damned, said he, staggering to his feet, clutching the brandy bottle. By some flash of intuition, I knew what he had intended. You don't give drink to that beast, I said, rising and facing him. Beast, said he. You're the beast. He takes his liquor like a Christian. Come out of that way, Pendrick. For God's sake, said I. Get out of the way, he roared, and suddenly whipped out his revolver. Very well, said I, and stood aside, half-minded to follow him upon and put his hand upon the latch, but deterred by the thought of my useless arm. You made a beast of yourself. To the beasts you may go. He flung the doorway open and stood half facing me between the yellow lamplight and the pallid glare of the moon. His eye sockets were blotched of black under his stubbly eyebrows. You're a solemn prig, Pendrick, a silly ass. You're always fearing and fancying. We're on the edge of things. I'm bound to cut my own throat tomorrow. I'm going to be damned bank holiday tonight. He turned and went out into the moonlight. Mei Ling, he cried. Mei Ling, old friend. 3 dim creatures in the silvery light came along the edge of the wide beach. One a white-wrapped creature, the other 2 blotches of blackness following it. They halted, staring. Then I saw Mei Ling's hunched shoulders as he came around the corner of the house. Drink, said Montgomery. Drink, you brutes. Drink and be men. Damn, I'm the cleverest. Moreau forgot this. This is the last touch. Drink, I tell you. And waving the bottle in his hand, he started off at a kind of quick trot to the westward, Mei Ling ranging himself behind him, and the 3 dim creatures who followed. I went to the doorway. They were already indistinct in the mist of the moonlight before Montgomery halted. I saw him administer a dose of raw brandy to Mei Ling and saw the 5 figures melt into the vague patch. Sing, I heard Montgomery shout. Sing all together. Confound old Pendrick. That's right, now again. Confound old Pendrick. That group broke up into 5 separate figures and wound slowly away from me along the band of the shining beach. Each went howling at his own sweet will, yelping insults at me, or giving whatever vent this new inspiration of brandy demanded. Presently I heard Montgomery's voice shouting, "Right turn!" and they passed with their shouts and howls into the blackness of the landward trees. Slowly, very slowly, they receded into silence. The peaceful splendor of the night healed again. The moon was now past the meridian and traveling down the west. It was at its full and very bright, riding through the empty blue sky. The shadow of the wall lay a yard wide and of inky blackness at my feet. The eastward sea was a featureless gray and dark and mysterious, and between the sea and the shadow of the gray sands, a volcanic glass and crystals flashed and shone like a beach of diamonds. Behind me, the paraffin lamp flared hot and ruddy. Then I turned, then I shut the door, locked it, and went into the enclosure where Moreau lay beside his latest victims. The hounds, and the llama, and some other wretched brutes, with his massive face calm even after his terrible death, and with his hard eyes open, staring at the dead white moon above. I sat down upon the edge of the sink, and with my eyes open, that ghastly pile of silvery light and ominous shadows began to turn over my plans. In the morning, I would gather some provisions in the dinghy, and after setting fire to the pyre before me, push out into the desolation of the high sea once more. I felt that for Montgomery there was no help, that he was in half truth, half akin to those beast folk, unfitted for human kindred. I do not know how long I sat there scheming. It must have been an hour or so. Then my planning was interrupted by the return of Montgomery to my neighborhood. I heard a yelling of many throats, a tumult of exulted cries passing down towards the beach, whooping and howling, and excited shrieks that seemed to come to the top near the water's edge. The riot rose and fell. I heard heavy blows and splintering smash of wood, but I did not trouble me then. A disconcerted chanting began. My thoughts went back to my means of escape. I got up, brought the lamp, and went into the shed and looked for some kegs that I had seen there. Then I became interested in the contents of some biscuit tins, and opened one and saw out of the tail of my eye a red figure, and turned sharply. Behind me lay the yard, vividly black and white in the moonlight, and a pile of wood and rags that the Moreau and his mutilated victims lay, one over the other. They seemed to be gripping one another in the last revengeful grapple. His wounds gaped black as the night, and the blood that dripped lay in black patches upon the sand. Then I saw, without understanding the cause of my phantom, a ruddy glow that came and danced and went upon the wall opposite. I misinterpreted this, fancied it as a reflection of my own flickering lamp, and turned again to the stores in the shed. I went on rummaging among them, and well as one-armed man could, finding this convenient thing and that, putting them aside for tomorrow's launch. My movements were slow, and the time passed quickly. Insensibly, the daylight crept upon me. The chanting died down, giving place to a clamor. Then it began again, and suddenly broke into tumult. I heard cries of "More! More!" a sound like quarreling, and a sudden wild shriek. The quality of the sounds changed so greatly that it arrested my attention. I went out to the yard and listened. Then, cutting like a knife across the confusion, came the crack of a revolver. I rushed at once through the door to the little doorway. As I did so, I heard some of the packing cases behind me go sliding down and smashing together with a clatter of glass on the floor of the shed. But I did not heed this. I flung the door open and looked out. Up on the beach by the boathouse, a bonfire was burning, raining up sparks into the distinctness of the dawn. Around this struggled a mass of black figures. I heard Montgomery calling my name. I began to run at once towards this fire, revolver in hand. I saw the pink tongue of Montgomery's pistol lick out once close to the ground. He was down. I shouted with all my strength and fired into the air. I heard someone cry, "The master!" The knotted black struggle broke into scattered units. The fire leapt and sank. A crowd of beast people fled into sudden panic before me, up the beach. In my excitement, I fired at their retreat backs as they disappeared among the bushes. Then I turned to the black heaps upon the ground. Montgomery lay on his back, with his hairy gray beastman sprawling across his body. The brute was dead, but still gripping Montgomery's throat and its curving claws. Nearby, Mei on his face, quite still, his neck bitten open, and upper part of the brandy bottle smashed in a hand. Two other figures lay near the fire, one motionless, the other groaning fitfully, every now and then raising its head slowly, then dropping it again. I caught hold of the gray man and pulled him off of Montgomery's body. His claws drew down and tore the cloak reluctantly as I dragged him away. Montgomery was dark in the face and scarcely breathing. I splashed seawater on his face and pillowed his head on my rolled up cloak. Mei Ling was dead. The wounded creature by the fire, it was a wolf brute with bearded gray face, lay, I found, with forepart of its body still glowing timber. The wretched thing was injured so dreadfully that in mercy I blew its brains out at once. The other brute was one of the bullmen, swathed in white. He too was dead. The rest of the beast people had vanished from the beach. I went to Montgomery again and knelt beside him, cursing my ignorance of medicine. The fire beside me had sunk down, and only charred beams of timber glowing at the central ends, mixed with gray ash of burst wood, remained. I wondered casually where Montgomery had got his wood. Then I saw that the dawn was upon us. The gray had grown brighter. The setting moon was becoming pale and opaque in the luminous blue of the day. The sky to the eastward was rimmed with red. Suddenly I heard a thud and a hissing behind me. I, looking around, sprang to my feet in a cry of horror. Against the warm dawn, against tumultuous masses of the black smoke, were boiling up out of the enclosure, and through the stormy darkness shot flickering threads of blood-red flame. Then the thatched roof caught. I saw the curving charge of the flames cross and sloping straw. A spurt of fire jetted from the windows of my room. I knew what had happened. I remembered the crash I had earlier. When I rushed out to see Montgomery's assistance, I overturned the lamp. The hopelessness of saving any of the contents of the enclosure stared me in the face. My mind came back to my plan of flight, and turning swiftly, I looked to where the two boats lay upon the beach. They were gone. Two axes lay upon the sand beside me. Chips and splinters were scattered broadcast, and ashes of the bonfire were blackening in smoke under the dawn. Montgomery had burnt the boats, and to revenge himself upon me and prevent our return to mankind. A sudden convulsion of rage shook me. I was almost moved to batter his fool head in as he lay helpless at my feet. Then suddenly his hand moved, so feebly, so pitifully, that my wrath vanished. Wraith. He groaned and opened his eyes for a minute. I knelt down beside him and raised his head and opened his eyes again, staring silently at the dawn. Then he met mine. The lids fell. Sorry, he said presently with an effort. He seemed trying to think. The last, he said, murmured, the last of this silly universe. What a mess. I listened. His head fell helplessly to one side. I thought some drink might revive him, but there was neither drink nor vessel to which would bring drink to hand. He seemed suddenly heavier. My heart went cold. I bent down to his face, put my hand through the rent of his blouse. He was dead. And even as he died, a line of white heat, the limb of the sun rose eastward beyond the projection of the bay, splashing its radiance across the sky, and turning the dark sea into a weltering tumult of dazzling light. It fell like a glory upon his death-shorn face. I let his head fall gently upon the rough pillow I had made for him, and stood up. Before me was the glistening desolation of the sea, an awful solitude upon which I had already suffered so much. Beyond me the island, hushed under the dawn, its beast people silent and unseen. The enclosure, with all its provisions and ammunition, burnt noisily, with sudden gusts of flame, a fitful crackling, and now then a crash. The heavy smoke drove up the beach, away from me, rolling low over the distant treetops toward the huts in the ravine. Beside me were the charred vestiges of the boats and 5 dead bodies. Then out of the bushes came 3 beast people with hunched shoulders, protruding heads, misshapen hands, awkwardly held, inquisitively unfriendly eyes, and advanced towards me with hesitating gestures. Chapter 20. Alone with the beast folk. I faced these people, facing my fate in them, single-handed now, literally single-handed, for I had a broken arm. In my pocket was a revolver with 2 empty chambers. Among the chips scattered about the beach lay the 2 axes that had been used to chop up the boats. The tide had crept in behind me. There was nothing for it but courage. I looked squarely into the faces of the advancing monsters. They avoided my eyes, and their quivering nostrils investigated the bodies that lay beyond me on the beach. I took half a dozen steps, picked up a blood-stained whip that lay at the body of the wolf man, and cracked it. They stopped and stared at me. "Salute," said I. "Bow down." They hesitated. One bent his knees. I repeated my command with my heart in my mouth, and advanced upon them. One knelt, then the other 2. I turned and walked towards the dead bodies, keeping my face towards the 3 kneeling beastmen, very much as the actor passing upon the stage faces of the audience. "They broke the law," said I, putting my foot on the sayer of the law. "They have been slain, even as the sayer of the law, even the other with the whip. Great is the law. Come and see. None escape. said one of them, advancing and peering. None escape, said I. Therefore hear and do as I command. They stood up, looking questioningly at one another. Stand there, said I. I picked up the hatchets and swung them by their heads from the sling in my arm, turned Montgomery over, picked up his revolver still loaded in 2 chambers, bending down to rummage, found half a dozen cartridges in his pocket. Take him, said I, standing up again and pointing with whip. Take him and carry him out and cast him into the sea. They came forward, evidently still afraid of Montgomery, but still more afraid of my cracked red whiplash. And after some fumbling and hesitation, some whip cracking and shouting, they lifted him gingerly, carried him down the beach, and went splashing into the dazzling welter of the sea. On, said I, on, carry him far. They went in up to their armpits and stood regarding me. Let go, said I, and the body of Montgomery vanished with a splash. Something seemed tightening across my chest. Good, said I, with a break in my voice, and they came back, hurrying and fearful, to the margin of the water, leaving long wakes of black in the silver. At the water's edge they stopped, turning and glaring into the sea as though they presently expected Montgomery to arise therefrom and exact vengeance. Now these, said I, pointing to the other bodies. They took care not to approach the place where they had thrown Montgomery into the water, but instead they carried the 4 dead beast people slanting along the beach for perhaps 100 yards before they waded out and cast them away. As I watched them disposing of the mangled remains of Mei Ling, I heard a light footfall behind me, and turning quickly, saw the big hyena swine perhaps a dozen yards away. His head was bent down, his bright eyes were fixed upon me, his stumpy eyes clinched, held close to his side. He stopped in his crouching attitude when I turned, his eyes a little averted. For a moment we stood eye to eye. I dropped the whip and snatched at the pistol in my pocket, for I meant to kill the brute, the most formidable any now left upon the island, at the first excuse. It may seem treacherous, but I was resolved. As far I was far more afraid of him than any of the other 2 of the beast folk. His continued life, I knew, was a threat against mine. I was perhaps a dozen seconds collecting myself. Then I cried, Salute! Bow down. His teeth flashed upon me in a snarl. Who are you that I should? Perhaps a little too spasmodically, I drew my revolver, aimed quickly, and fired. I heard him yelp, saw him run sideways and turn. I knew I had missed, and clicked back the cock with the thumb at my next shot, but he was already running headlong, jumping from side to side, and I dared not risk another miss. Every now and then he looked back at me over his shoulder. He went slanting along the beach and vanished beneath the driving masses of the dense smoke that were still pouring out from the burning enclosures. For some time I stood staring after him. I turned to my 3 obedient beast folk again and signaled them to drop the body as they carried. Then I went back to the place by the fire where the bodies had fallen and kicked the sand until all the brown blood stains, were absorbed and hidden. I dismissed my 3 serfs with a wave of my hand and went up the beach to the thickets. I carried my pistol in my hands, my whip thrust with hatchets in the sling of the arm. I was anxious to be alone, to think out the position in which I was now placed. A dreadful thing that I was now only beginning to realize was that over all this island there was now no safe place that I could be alone and secure rest or sleep. I had recovered strength amazingly since my landing, but I was still inclined to be nervous and break down under great stress. I felt that I ought to cross the island and establish myself with the beast folk and make myself secure in their confidence. But my heart failed me. I went back to the beach, and turning eastward past the burning enclosures, I made for a point where a shallow spit of coral sand ran out towards the reef. Here I could sit down and think with my back to the sea and my face against any surprises. And there I sat, chin on knees, the sun beating down upon my head, an unspeakable dread in my mind, plotting how I could live on against the hour of my rescue, if ever a rescue came. I tried to review the whole situation as calmly as I could, but it was difficult to clear the thing of emotion. I began turning over in my mind the reason of Montgomery's despair. They will change, he said. They will sure to change. And Moreau, what was it that Moreau had said? The stubborn beast flesh grows day by day back again. Then I came around to the hyena swine. I felt sure that if I had not killed the brute, he would kill me. The sayer of the law was dead. Worse luck. They knew now that we of the whips could be killed, even as they themselves were killed. Were they peering at me out through the green masses of the ferns and palms over yonder, watching until I came within their spring? Were they plotting against me? What was the hyena swine telling them? My imagination was running away with me with a morose of unsubstantial fear. My thoughts were disturbed by the crying of seabirds hurrying towards some black objects that had been stranded by the waves of the beach near the enclosure. I knew what the object was, but I had not the heart to go back and drive them off. I began walking along the beach in the opposite direction, designing to come around to the eastward corner of the island and so approach the ravine of the huts without traversing the possible am- ambuscades of the thickets. Perhaps half a mile along the beach, I became aware of one of my three beast folks advancing on the landward bushes towards me. I was now so nervous with my own imaginings that I immediately drew my revolver. Even the proprietary gestures of the creature failed to disarm me. He hesitated as I approached. Go away, cried I. There was something very suggestive of a dog in a cringing attitude of the creature. It retreated a little way, very like a dog being sent home, and stopped, looking at me imploringly with canine brown eyes. Go away, said I. Do not come near me. May I not come near you? It said. No, go away, I insisted. It snapped my whip. Then, putting my whip in my teeth, I stooped over a stone, and with that threat drove the creature away. So in solitude I came round by the ravine of the beast people, and hiding among the weeds and reeds that separated the crevasse from the sea, I watched with such as them as they appeared, trying to judge from their gestures and appearance how the death of Moreau and Montgomery and the destruction of the house of pain had affected them. I know now that the folly of my cowardice. Had I kept my courage up the level of the dawn, had I not allowed it to ebb away in solitary thought, I might have grasped the vacant scepter of Moreau and ruled over the beast people. As it was, I lost the opportunity and sank to a position of mere leader among my fellows. Towards noon, certain of them came and squatted, basking in the hot sand. An imperious voice of hunger and thirst prevailed over my dread. I came out of the bushes, revolver in hand, walked down towards these seated figures. One, a wolf woman, turned her head and stared at me and the others. None attempted to rise or salute me. I felt too faint and weary to insist, and I let the moment pass. I want food, said I, almost apologetically, and drawing near. There is food in the huts, said the ox boar man, drowsily looking away from me. I passed them and went down into the shadows and the odors of the almost deserted ravine. In an empty hut, I feasted on some specked and half decayed fruit, and then, after I had propped some branches and sticks about the opening and placed myself with my face towards it and my hand upon the revolver, the exhaustion of the last 30 hours claimed its own. I fell into a light slumber, hoping that the flimsy barricade I had erected would cause some sufficient noise in its removal to save me from surprise. Chapter 21. The Reversion of the Beast Folk. In this way, I became among one of the beast people of the island of Doctor Moreau. When I awoke, it was dark about me. My arm ached in its bandages. I sat up, wondering at first where I might be. I heard coarse voices talking outside. Then I saw that my barricade had gone, and that the opening of the hut stood clear. My revolver was still in my hand. I heard something breathing. Something I saw. I heard something breathing. Saw something crouched together close beside me. I held my breath, trying to see what it was. I aimed to move slowly, interminably. Then something soft and warm and moist passed across my hand. All my muscles contracted. I snatched my hand away. A cry of alarm began, and I was stifled in my throat. Then I just realized what had happened sufficiently to stay my fingers on the revolver. "Who is it?" I said in a hoarse whisper, as the revolver still pointed. "I, master. Who are you?" "They say there is no master now, but I know. I carried the bodies into the sea, O walker of this in the sea, the bodies of those you slew. I am your slave, master." "Are you the one I met on the beach?" I asked. "The same, master." The thing was evidently faithful enough, for it might have fallen upon me as I slept. "It is well," I said, extending my hand for another licking kiss. I began to realize what its presence meant, and the tide of my courage flowed. "Where are the others?" I asked. "They are mad. They are fools," said the dogman. "Even now they talk together beyond there. They say, 'The master is dead. The other with the whip is dead. The other who walked into the sea is as we are. We have no master, no whips, no house of pain any more. There is an end. We love the law and will keep it, but there is no pain, no master, no whips forever again.' So they say. But I know the master. I know." I felt in the darkness and patted the dog man's head. "It is well," I said again. "Presently you will slay them all," said the dog man. "Presently," I answered, "I will slay them all, after certain days and certain things have come to pass." Every one of them, save those you spare, every one of them shall be slain. What the master wishes to kill, the master kills, said the dog man with a certain satisfaction in his voice. And that their sins may grow, I said. Let them live in their folly until their time is ripe. Let them not know that I am the master. The master will is sweet, said the dog man, with a ready tact of his canine blood. But one has sinned, said I. Him I will kill, whenever I may meet him. When I say to you, that is he, see that you fall upon him. And now I will go to the men and the women who are assembled together. For a moment at the opening of the hut was blackened by the exit of the dog man. Then I followed and stood up, almost in the exact spot where I had been when I had heard Moreau and the stag hound pursuing me. But now it was night, and all the Mismavenic ravine about me was black, and beyond, instead of a green sunlit slope, I saw red fire, before which hunched grotesque figures moved to and fro. Farther were the thick trees, a bank of darkness fringed above that black lace of the upper branches. The moon was just riding up the edge of the ravine, and like a bar across the face drove the spire of vapor that was forever streaming from the funnels of the island. Walk by me, said I, nerving myself, and side by side we walked down the narrow way, taking little heed of the dim things that peered at us out of the huts. None about the fire attempted to salute me. Most of them disregarded me ostentatiously. I looked around for the hyena swine, but he was not there. Altogether, perhaps 20 of the beast folk squatted, staring into the fire or talking to one another. He is dead. He is dead. The master is dead, said the voice of the ape man to the right of me. The house of pain. There is no house of pain. He is not dead, said I, in a loud voice. Even now he watches us. This startled them. 20 pairs of eyes regarded me. The house of pain is gone, said I. It will come again. The master you cannot see, yet even now he listens among you. True, true, said the dog man. They were staggered by my assurance. An animal may be ferocious and cunning enough, but it takes a real man to tell a lie. The man with the bandaged arm speaks a strange thing, said one of the beast folk. I tell you it is so, said I. The master in the house of pain will come again. Woe be to him who breaks the law. They looked curiously at one another with an affection of indifference. I began to chop idly at the ground in front of me with my deep hatchet. They looked, I noticed, at the deep cuts I made in the turf. Then the satyr raised a doubt. I answered him. Then one of the dappled things objected, and an animated discussion sprang up around the fire. Every moment I began to feel more convinced at my present security. I talked now without catching my breath, due to the intensity of my excitement. That had troubled me at first. In the course of about an hour, I had really convinced several of the beast folk of the truth of my assertions, and talked most of the others into dubious state. I kept a sharp eye for my enemy, the hyena swine, but he never appeared. Every now and then a suspicious movement would startle me, but my confidence grew rapidly. Then, as the mood reached into its zenith, one by one the listeners began to yawn, showing the oddest teeth in the light of the sinking fire. And first one, then another retired towards the dens in the ravine. And I, dreading the silence and the darkness, went with them, knowing I was safer with several of them than one alone. In this manner began the longer part of my sojourn upon the island of Doctor Moreau. But from that night until the end came, there was but one thing happened to tell save a series of innumerable small unpleasant details and the fretting of the incessant uneasiness, so that I prefer to make no chronicles for that gap of time. I tell only one cardinal incident of the 10 months I spent as an intimate of these half humanized brutes. There is much that sticks in my memory as I could write, things I would cheerfully give my right hand to forget, but they could not help telling the story. In the retrospect, it is a strange to remember how soon I fell in with these monstrous ways, and gained my confidence again. I had I had my quarrels with them, of course, and could show some of their teeth marks still, but they soon gained a wholesome respect for my trick of throwing stones and for the bite of my hatchet. And my St. Bernard's man's loyalty was infinite service to me. I found their simple scale of honor was based mainly on the capacity for inflicting trenchant wounds. Indeed, I may say, without vanity, I hope, that I held something like preeminence among them. One or two, whom in a rare access of high spirits had scarried it rather badly, bore me a grudge, but it vented itself chiefly behind my back and at a safe distance from my missiles in grimaces. The hyena swine avoided me, and I was always on alert for him. My inseparable dog man hated and dreaded him intensely. I really believe that it was at the root of the brute's attachment to me. It was soon evident to me that the former monster had tasted blood and had gone the way of the leopard man. He formed a lair somewhere in the forest and became solitary. Once I tried to induce the beast folk to hunt him, but I lacked the authority to make them cooperate for one end. Again and again I tried to approach his den and came upon him unaware, but always he was too acute for me, and saw or winded me and got away. He too made every forest pathway dangerous to me, and my ally with his lurking ambuscades. The dogman scarcely dared to leave my side. In the first month or so, the beast folk, compared with their latter condition, were human enough, and for one or two beside my canine friend, I even convinced of friendly tolerance. The little pink sloth creature displayed an odd affection for me, and took to following me about. The monkey man bore me, however, he assumed, on the strength of his 5 digits, and he was my equal, and was forever jabbering at me, jabbering the most arrant nonsense. One thing about him entertained me a little. He had a fantastic trick of coining new words. He had an idea, I believe, that to gabble about names that meant nothing was the proper use of speech. He called it big thinks to distinguish it from little things, the sane everyday interests of life. If ever I had a remark he did not understand, he would praise it very much, ask me to say it again, learn it by heart, and go off repeating it with every word wrong here and there. To all the milder of the beast people, he thought nothing of what was plain incomprehensible. I invented some very curious big thinks for his epicule use. I think now that he was the silliest creature I'd ever met. He had developed the most wonderful way the distinctive silliness of man without losing one jot of the jolly Nate folly of a monkey. This, I say, was the earlier weeks of my solitude among these brutes. During that time, they respected the usage established by the law and behaved with general decorum. Once I found another rabbit torn to pieces by the hyena swine, I am assured, but that was all. It was about May when I first distinctively perceived a growing indifference in their speech in carnage, a growing coarseness of articulation, a growing disinclination to talk. My monkey man's jabbering multiplied in volume, but grew less and less comprehensible, and more simian. Some of the others seemed altogether slipping their hold upon speech, although they still understood what I said to them at the time. Can you imagine language once clear cut and exact, softening and guttering, losing shape and import, becoming mere lumps of sound again? And they walked erect with an increased difficulty, though they evidently felt ashamed of themselves. Every now and then I would come upon one or another running on toes and fingertips, quite unable to recover their vertical attitude. They held things more clumsily, drinking by suction, feeding by gnawing, grew commoner every day. I realized more keenly, more than ever, what Moreau had told me about the stubborn beast flesh. They were reverting, and reverting very rapidly. Some of them, the pioneers of this, I noticed with some surprise, were all females, began to disregard the injunction of decency, and deliberately for most part. Others even attempted public outrages upon the institution of monogamy. The tradition of the law was clearly losing its force. I cannot pursue this disagreeable subject. My dogman imperceptibly slipped back into dog again. Day by day he became dumb, quadrupedal, hairy. I scarcely noticed the transition from the companion on my right hand to the lurching dog at my side. As the carelessness and disorganization increased from day to day, the lane of dwelling places, at no time very sweet, became a loathsome that I left it. Going across the island, I made myself a hovel of boughs amid the black ruins of Moreau's enclosure. Some memory of pain, I found, still made the place safe from the beast folk. It would be impossible to detail every step of the lapsing of these monsters, to tell them day by day the human semblance left them, how they gave up bandaging and wrappings, abandoned at each and every stitch of clothing, how the hair began to spread over their exposed limbs, how their foreheads fell away and their face projected, how the quasi human intimacy I had permitted myself with some of them in the first month of my loneliness became a shuddering horror to recall. The change was slow and inevitable. For them and for me it came without any definite shock. I still went among them in safety because no jolt in downward glide had released the increasing charge of the explosive animalism that ousted the human day by day. but I began to fear that soon now that shock might come. My St. Bernard brute followed me to the enclosure every night, and his vigilance enabled me to sleep at times in something like peace. The little pink sloth thing became shy and left me, to crawl back to its natural life once more among the tree branches. We were in just the state of equilibrium that would remain in one of those happy family cages which family tamers exhibit, if a tamer were to leave it forever. Of course, these creatures did not decline into such beasts as to the reader had seen in zoological gardens, into ordinary bears, wolves, tigers, oxen, swine, and apes. There was still something strange about them. In every each Moreau had blended this animal with that. One perhaps was ursine chiefly, another feline chiefly, another bovine chiefly, but each was tainted with the other's creatures, a kind of generalized animalism appearing through the specific dispositions. And the dwindling shreds of humanity still startled me every now and then. A momentary recrudescence of speech, perhaps, an unexpected dexterity of the forefoot, a pitiful attempt to walk erect. I too must have undergone strange changes. My clothes hung about me as yellow rags, though whose rents now tanned skin. My hair grew long and became matted together. I am told that even now my eyes have a strange brightness, a swift alertness of movement. At first I spent the daylight hours on the southward beach, watching for a ship, hoping and praying for a ship. I counted on the Ipecacuanha returning as a year wore on, but she never came. 5 times I saw sails and thrice smoke, but nothing ever touched the island. I always had a bonfire ready, but no doubt the volcanic reputation of the island was taken to that for the account. It was only September or October that I began to think about making a raft. By that time, my arm had healed, and both my hands had at my service again. At first, I found my helplessness appalling. I had never done any carpentry or such like work in my life, and I spent day after day in experimental chopping and binding among the trees. I had no ropes and could hit on the nothing whereat to make ropes. None but the abundant creepers seemed limber or strong enough, and with all my litter of scientific education, I could not devise any way of making them. So I spent more than a fortnight grubbing among the black ruins of the enclosure and on the beach where the boats had been burnt, looking for nails and other stray pieces of metal that might prove of service. Now and then, some beast creatures would watch me and go leaping off when I called to it. There came a season of thunderstorms and heavy rains, which greatly retarded my work, but at last the raft was completed. I was delighted with this, but with a certain lack of practical sense which had always been my bane, I made it a mile or more from the sea before I dragged it down to the beach. The thing had fallen to pieces. Perhaps it is well that I was saved from launching it, but at the same time my misery at my failure was so acute that for some days I simply moped on the beach and stared at the water and thought of death. I did not, however, mean to die, and an incident occurred that warned me unmistakably of the folly of letting the days pass so, for each fresh day was fraught with increasing dangers from the beast people. I was lying in the shade of the enclosure wall, staring out to the sea, when I was startled by something cold touching the skin of my heel. In starting around, found the little pink sloth creature blinking into my face. He had long since lost his speech and active movement, and the lank hair of the little brute creature grew thicker every day, and his stumpy claws grew askew. He made a moaning noise, and when I saw he had attracted my attention, went a little way towards the bushes and looked back at me. At first, I did not understand, but presently it occurred to me that he wished me to follow him, and this I did at last. Slowly, for a day was hot. When I reached the trees, he clambered into them, for he could travel better among the swinging creepers than on the ground. And suddenly, in a trampled space, I came upon the ghastly group. My St. Bernard creature lay on the ground, dead, and his body crouched the hyena's swine, gripping the quivering flesh in its misshapen claws, gnawing it, snarling with delight. As I approached, the monster lifted its glaring eyes to mine. Its lips went to growl menacingly. It was not afraid, not ashamed. The last vestiges of human taint had vanished. I advanced a step further, stopped, pulled out my revolver. At last I had him face to face. The brute made no sign of retreat, but its ears went back, its hair bristled, its body crouched together. I aimed between its eyes and fired. As I did so, the thing rose against me in a leap. I was knocked over like a ninepin. It clutched at me with its crippled hand and struck me in the face. It sprung, its spring carried it over me, and I fell under the hind part of the body, but luckily I had hit as I meant, and it died even as it leapt. I crawled out from underneath its unclean weight and stood up trembling, staring at its quivering body. That danger was at least over, but this, I knew, was only the first of the series of relapses that must come. I burnt both of the bodies on a pyre of brushwood, but after that I saw that unless I left the island, my death was only a question of time. The Beast People, by that time, had, with one or two exceptions, left the ravine and made themselves lairs according to their tastes among the thickets of the island. Few prowled by day, most of them slept, and the island might have seemed deserted to a newcomer. But at night the air was hideous with their calls and howlings. I had half a mind to make a massacre of them, to build traps, or to fight them with my knife. Had I possessed sufficient cartridges, I would not have hesitated to begin the killing. There could now scarcely be a score left of the dangerous carnivores. The braver of these were already dead. After the death of this poor dog of mine, my last friend, I too adopted some extent of practice of slumbering in the daytime in order to be on guard at night. I rebuilt the den in my walls of the enclosure with such a narrow opening that anything attempting to enter might necessarily make a considerable noise. The creature had lost the art of fire too, and discovered their fear of it. I turned once more, and almost passionately now, to hammering together stakes and branches and form a raft for my escape. I found 1,000 difficulties. I am an extremely unhandy man. My schooling was over before the days of soldier, but most of the requirements of the raft I met at last in some clumsy, circuitous way or another, and this time I took care in its strength. The only insurmountable obstacle was that I had no vessel to contain the water I should need if I floated forth among these untraveled seas. I would have even tried pottery, but the island contained no clay. I used to go moping about the island, trying all my might to solve this one last difficulty. Sometimes I would give way to wild outbursts of rage and hack or splinter some unlucky tree in my uncontrollable vexation, but I could think of nothing. Then came the day, a wonderful day, which I spent in ecstasy. I saw a sail to the southwest, a small sail like that of a little schooner. With forthwith I lit a great pile of brushwood, and stood by it in the heat of it, and the heat of the midday sun, watching. All day I watched that sail, eating or drinking nothing, so that my head reeled, and the beast came and glared at me, and seemed to wonder and went away. It was still distant when night came and swallowed it up, and all night I toiled to keep up my blaze bright and high, and the eyes of the beast shone out of the darkness, marveling. In the dawn the sail was nearer, and I saw it was a dirty lug snail of a small boat, but it sailed strangely. My eyes were weary with watching, and I peered, and I could not believe them. Two men were in the boat, sitting low down, one by the bows, the other by the rudder. The head was not kept to the wind. It yawed and fell away. As the day grew brighter, I began waving in last rag of my shirt to them, but they did not notice me, and sat still, facing each other. I went to the low point of the headland, and gesticulated and shouted. There was no response, and the boat kept on her aimless course, making slowly, very slowly, for the bay. Suddenly a great white bird flew up out of the boat, and neither of the men stirred or noticed it. It circled around and then came sweeping overhead with its strong wings outspread. Then I stopped shouting, and I sat down on the headlands and rested my chin on my hands and stared. Slowly, slowly, the boat drove past towards the west. I would have swum out to it, but something cold, vague fear kept me back. In the afternoon, the tide stranded the boat and left it 100 yards or so to the west of the ruins of the enclosure. The men in it were dead, had been dead so long that they had fell to pieces when I tilted the boat on its side and dragged them out. One had the shock of red hair, like the captain of the Esperana, and dirty white cap lay in the bottom of the boat. As I stood beside the boat, three of the beasts came slinking out of the bushes, sniffing towards me. One of my spasms of disgust came upon me. I thrust the little boat down the beach, clambered up on her. Two of the brutes were wolf beasts, and came forward with quivering nostrils and glittering eyes. The third was the horrible nondescript of the bear and bull. When I saw them approaching, those wretched remains, I heard them snarling at one another, caught in the gleam of their teeth. A frantic horror succeeded my repulsion. I turned my back upon them, struggled the lug, and paddled out to sea. I could not bring myself to look behind me. I lay, however, between the reef and the island that night, and the next morning went around to the stream and filled the empty keg aboard with water. Then, with the patience as I could, I collected a quantity of fruit and waylaid, killed of 2 rabbits with my last 3 cartridges. While I was doing this, I left the boat moored on the inward projection of the reef for fear of the beast people. Chapter 22. In the evening I started and drove out to sea before a gentle wind from the southwest. Slowly, steadily, the island grew smaller and smaller, and the lank spire of the smoke dwindled to a finer and finer line against the hot sunlight. The ocean rose up around me, hiding that low, dark patch from my eyes. The daylight, the trailing glow of the sun went streaming out of the sky, drawn aside like some luminous curtain, and at last I looked into the blue gulf of immensity which the sunshine hides, and saw the floating hosts of the stars. The sea was silent, and the sky was silent. I was alone with the night and the silence. So I drifted for 3 days, eating and drinking sparingly, meditating upon all that had happened to me, not desiring very greatly to see men again. One unclean rag was about me, my hair black tangled. No doubt my discoverers thought me a madman. It is strange, but I felt no desire to return to mankind. I was only glad to be quit of the foulness of the beast people. And on the third day I was picked up by a brig from Apia to San Francisco. Neither the captain nor the mate would believe my story, judging the solitude and danger had made me mad, and fearing their opinion of me invite others. I refrained from telling my adventure further, and professed to recall nothing that had happened between the loss of the Lady Vane and the time when I was picked up again, the space of a year. I had to act with the utmost circumspection to save myself from the suspicion of insanity. My memory of the law, of the two dead sailors, of the ambiguous, of the darkness of the body in the cane brakes, haunted me, and unnatural as it seems, with my return to mankind came, instead of that confidence and sympathy I had expected, a strange enhancement of uncertainty and dread I had experienced during my stay upon the island. No one would believe me. I was almost as odd to men as I had been to the beast people. I had been I may have caught something of the natural wilderness of my companions. They say that terror is a disease, and anyone I can witness that for several years now a restless fear had dealt in my mind. Such a restless fear as a half tamed lion cub may feel. My trouble took the strangest form. I could not persuade myself that men and women I met were not another beast people, animals half wrought out of outward image of human souls, and that they would presently begin to revert, to show first his bestial mark and then that. But I have confided my case to a strangely able man, a man who had known Moreau, and seemed half to credit my story, a mental specialist, and he had helped me mightily through. I do not expect that the terrors of the island will altogether leave me. At most times it lies far in my back of my mind, a mere distant cloud, a memory and a faint distrust. But there are times when that little cloud spreads until it obscures the whole sky. Then I look about me with my fellow men, and I go in fear. I see keen faces, bright, others dull and dangerous, others unsteady, insincere. None have that calm authority of a reasonable soul. I feel as though the animal was surging up through them, that presently the degradation of the islanders will be played over on a larger scale. I know this is an illusion, that these seeming these seeming men and women about me are indeed men and women. Men and women forever perfectly reasonable creatures, full of human desires and tender solitudes, emancipated from instinct and the slaves of no fantastic law, beings altogether different from the beast folk. Yet I shrink from them, from their curious glances, their inquiries and assistance, and long to be away from them and alone. For that reason, I live near the broad, free downland, and can escape hither when the shadow is over my soul. And very sweet is the empty downland then, under the windswept sky. When I lived in London, the horror was well nigh unsusceptible. I could not get away from men. Their voices came through windows, locked doors were flimsy safeguards. I would go out into the streets to fight with my delusions, and prowling women would mew after me. Furtive, craving men glanced jealously at me. Weary, pale workers go coughing by me with tired eyes and eager paces, like wounded deer, dripping blood. Old people, bent and dull, pass murmuring to themselves, and all unheeding a ragged tale of gibbering children. Then I would turn aside into some chapel, and even there, such was my disturbance, it seemed that the preacher gibbered big thinks, even as the ape man had done, or into some library, and there the intent faces over the books seemed but patient creatures waiting for their prey. Particularly nauseous were those blank, expressionless faces in the people on the trains, omnibuses. They seemed no more my fellow creatures than dead bodies would be. So I would dare not to travel unless I was assured of being alone. Even it seemed that I too was not a reasonable creature, but only an animal tormented with some strange disorder in its brain, which sent it to go wander alone like a sheep stricken with gid. This is the mood, however, that comes to me now, and I thank God more rarely. I have withdrawn myself from the confusion of cities and multitudes, and spend my days surrounded by wise books, bright windows in this life of ours, lit by the shining souls of men. I see few strangers, and have but a small household. My days I devote to reading and to my experiments in chemistry, and I spend many of the clear nights in the study of astronomy. There is, though I do not know how there is or why there is, a sense of infinite peace and protection in the glittering hosts of heaven. There it must be, I think, in the vast and eternal laws of matter, and not in the daily cares or sins and troubles of men, that wherever there is more than animal within us must find solace and its hope. I hope, or I could not live. And so, in hope and in solitude, my story ends. Edward Prendrick. And that, with the return to the human lands, away from the beast people, we find the end of the Island of Doctor Moreau. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed this book. The story is powerful. The last few bits kind of reminded me of some of the things going on in the world right now with the way politics are and how scary and frightening people have become when treating people as gods and people who don't always speak truthfulness in the following of one crazy man. Hope you enjoyed the story. I hope you enjoyed the story. We do this every Sunday night live on Twitch and also here on YouTube. For those of you who are watching me on YouTube, welcome. Bonjour, konnichiwa, hola, salut. I ask you that when you get a chance, tell your friends, tell your parents, tell your everybody you talk to, stop by, like and subscribe. We're always glad to have you here. Um, one of the things we do here on the show is we do something similar to what we do on the Thursday night show. We do two shows here on Twitch. This show gets on YouTube. I might put the other one on, but it's so many other people do talk shows. I want to do this instead, something different. And what we do on the other show as well as here, we do a final quote, sometimes a fun quote to kind of wrap up the show. And for you guys, procrastinating. The art of reading instead of doing whatever else we should be doing. Procrastinating. I don't know about you, but yeah, I have days like that. Could be doing my pre-programming, and then what I want to do, I go and do my book that I find. And I've got a bunch of books here in my library. Reminding everybody that with this show, we do public domain books, and this is all we read. We want to make sure that people don't forget that reading, be that from digital Libby or wherever we get our books, that we read. We exercise our minds, our bodies, we exercise. But it's up here we need to remember to exercise. Otherwise, we fall into a dreadful pit of despair, ego, listening to anybody who likes to whisper lies and garbage that is untruth. So read, learn, explore, guys. Speaking of exploring, next week we leave H.G. Wells and we travel back several decades from when H.G. Wells was. And next Sunday, we have a little bit of fun. Because next Sunday, we will be doing selected readings of Edgar Allan Poe. I am very excited by that. Very much excited by that at all. Oop, wrong button. Like I said, the hands and the brain aren't working right now, guys. Now, as we've said in the past, what we do here is we read public domain books. H.G. Wells, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, um, Shakespeare. Many, many different books, many unique books here. Nathaniel Hawthorne. Next week, Edgar Allan Poe. But I've got something big for the week of Halloween. Something I'm very excited to present to you guys. Something in public domain. Because on Sunday, the 27th, on this show, And also on the Thursday night Halloween edition of Accessibly Live, we will be doing something very unique. We will be doing a movie, a very public domain movie, a movie that is a silent movie made in the 1920s, over 100 years ago. And this movie is an early classic that the likes of all vampire movies came from. This movie is, of course, Nosferatu. So on October 27th and October 31st, we will be presenting live here the public domain presentation of Nosferatu, the original, very first vampire movie. I'm excited. I'm excited to present it for you. We will have, it's about an hour and a half, about the same time length as it. One of the unique things about Nosferatu, it is a silent movie, but it has music playing in the background, kind of like a band when you're watching a movie. So that Sunday the 27th, grab some popcorn, turn down the lights, get something cold to drink or something warm to drink, and join us for a bite of Nosferatu. It'll be a lot of fun, and I hope you join us. We're gonna get out of here, guys. I appreciate each and every one of you for joining us. Um, I had one more quote for the night I wanted to share with you. This one I think you like as well too. Sometimes it is hard to locate the pain, to explore the pain, and that is why together in quiet can be so meaningful. That is why presence is more important than words. It is true. When you have a good friend and a good friend is in need of just having somebody be there, sometimes just being there and not saying anything is some of the best things you can do for a friendship. You order a pizza, kick back on the couch in the recliner, and enjoy. And just enjoy each other's company. Sometimes that's the best way of doing it. I am Joel K. This is Accessibly Live, the book club reading room, every single Sunday night here, both on Twitch and on YouTube. And I appreciate each and every one of you. Be well, be safe, be kind. We will see you all next week for Edgar Allan Poe selected readings. And also on Thursday for Accessibly Live, the Conversation Station. Take care, all. We'll see you all next week. Take care.